Good evening, everyone. Our webinar will be starting in about 1 minute. We do invite you to please sign in the chat feature. Let us know who you are and where you're from. So nice to have you joining us this evening. Good evening, everyone. My name is Paul Mack, and I'm Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Association for Middle Level Education. On behalf of PAMLE and Eastern University, we welcome you to this webinar. This particular webinar is brought to you to review a little bit of what's been going on for the last 14 months and taking a look at the things that we've learned, those kinds of things that perhaps we would like to modify just a little bit, and those ideas and practices that we'd like to see go by the wayside. We have a terrific panel this evening. Of course, Judy Brew, who has been with us all season with all of our webinars and is an expert on the philosophy of middle level education, where it came from, and exactly who those individuals were that got the whole thing rolling. So Judy is with us. Gail Heinemeyer, who is well known through AMLE circles as well as PAMLE, where she's served as president and member of the executive board, and now a member of the Southeast Region Board. And Gail is our moderator this evening. We're also very privileged to have a fine set of panelists with us. So we have Kori Studemeyer from Kennett Middle School. Kori's a counselor there. Alyssa Betz, who's a teacher at Elizabeth Forward Middle School. Devin Layton, who's the assistant principal at Springton Lake Middle School. And Leyda Owens, who is a teacher at the Northwest Middle School and Reading School District. Tom Ralston, who is the superintendent at Avonworth School District, and Jonathan Ross, who is the principal at Lionville Middle School, also the president of the Pennsylvania Principals Association. A great panel, some folks who have some terrific understanding of this whole issue that we're going to be looking at this evening. And we welcome you, our guests. We're hoping that you will be willing to share some of your insights and ask questions. Please do feel free to ask questions throughout the presentation. So at this time, we're going to turn it over to my colleague, Judy Brew.
Well, actually, you're going to turn it over to your colleague, Gail Heinemeyer first.
Oh, okay, Gail. Here we go.
We want to talk a little bit about what are the goals and to reflect on some answers to questions that we have posed, that we will be getting some feedback from our panelists. But what are the practices and the policies and programs that really have made sense and that we found we want to keep that when we return to face-to-face instruction. What are those that maybe didn't work quite as well as we wanted and we'll modify them moving forward? Are there some things that we just no longer need and we're going to be happy to get rid of? And certainly, what is it that we can celebrate from this past year? Because there certainly are things that have come out of it that really are worthy of recognition. And how will we celebrate those things? So let's begin by getting a sense of who our audience is this evening. And you can do that by one of two ways. If you have a QR code, read that QR code to enter the poll, or go to slido.com and enter the poll hashtag 528227 and let us know who's here this evening. So we kind of get a sense of who is in our audience. We'll give you a few seconds to do that, either using the QR code or going to the website for slido.com. Okay, and we'll give it about another 10 seconds. Okay, so it looks like we have a nice breakdown with about 50% of this group as teachers. We have some administrators and then the ever popular other, whoever those folks may be. So now we'll pass it over to Judy, and she's going to talk a little bit about who the founding fathers of this movement were.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. We start out all of our webinars by paying tribute to the founders of the middle level movement. I was fortunate enough to study with and work with all of the founders. And I think it's important that we link everything we do back to what the philosophy of the middle level school was designed for, and really what we should keep. I'm not going to belabor the issue with this. On the next slide, you'll see a quote by John Lounsbury. He's known as the conscience of the middle school. We've been through such a tough year, and John and all the rest of the founders actually looked forward to change. But as you can see, what John said was that he thought it was most important to consider the human side of the profession and how change impacts the social, emotional, psychological characteristics and needs of not only the students, but of the staff as well. So as we transition back and forth from internet, Zoom, and back to real life, and then summer vacation, and who knows what happens in the fall, whatever happens, whatever we keep, whatever we change, we have to really understand that it is difficult to put up with the unfamiliar, and understanding that we're all going to make mistakes. The kids are going to make mistakes, the teachers are going to make mistakes, and even the administrators are going to make some mistakes. So with that in mind, we'll get right into it.
I think this sort of summarizes what we can look at in terms of this whole past year. The Winston Churchill quote, "Never let a good crisis go to waste." And so we certainly entered a crisis stage last year when all of a sudden our governor said schools are closed. And how did we react to that? What were we going to do? How were we going to address those issues? So we have learned a great deal as a result of doing that. And we're going to take a look at that with what the panelists have to say. But we want to ask you to respond to this question. And again, use your QR code reader or enter the slido.com website and enter one word to describe how you felt about this school year. And that may be difficult to put it in one word, but if you would go to that spot and just give us one word about what were your thoughts, what were your feelings, what were your concerns, what is it that you see about this past year? And I'm already seeing a theme kind of coming: unsettled, scattered, chaos, overwhelmed, and we're all tired. Ever changing, so we're kind of constantly reacting and pivoting to what the circumstances are at the moment. All right, give you another few seconds to see if anybody else would like to enter something into that. Okay, and now with that appropriate allowance for wait time, there's that last one coming in, says, awesome. Imagine the things that we have discovered in the course of this year. So our panelists are going to share some of that with you and talk about the fact that we have all experienced this from our different points of view. We've all come up with ideas, things that we know are going to work, things that we want to get rid of. And let's try to get a perspective from across the state of how people have felt like that. So I'm going to begin by turning it over to Tom Ralston from the Avonworth School District. And from a superintendent's perspective, Tom, take it away.
Thank you, Gail. Good evening, everyone. I'm Tom Ralston, the superintendent at Avonworth School District. Spent most of my career in middle school. Started out as a middle school teacher for the first 7 years of my career. And then I spent 14 years as a middle school principal. And then the last 9 as a superintendent. I'm actually retiring at the end of the year and moving into higher education as a professor, assistant professor at University of Pittsburgh. So one of the things I just have to start off in saying is thank you, sincerely thank you. If you're an educator, you have just been incredibly resilient this year to be able to tackle all the challenges that have been thrust upon us through the pandemic. And I know with my staff, and it's certainly true across the state, that people have crunched 3 or 4 school years into one with the number of changes that they've had to make, and being able to be nimble enough to pivot when the circumstances needed folks to do that. So, but just some things that I wanted to highlight in my experiences at Avonworth. What we want to keep, obviously, are the student-centered practices that I think are really, really important. And we found really creative ways to do that. So, not being, I think, confined by the circumstances, we were forced sometimes to think creatively about how to continue project-based learning and the collaboration that we think is so valuable that students gain through that experience. Found really great partners online to make that project-based learning experience authentic for our students. And we found really unique ways to connect students with one another, but with technology to collaborate. Some students were home, some students were at school at the same time, in breakout rooms and all sorts of unique ways to be able to do that. One of the things that stood out to me in terms of what we might modify for the future were some of the things that revolved around meetings, right? So how we meet for conferences, parent conferences, or IEPs, GIEPs. We were a lot more effective. It's one of the most things that stood out early on in the pandemic. I heard many people talking about the convenience for people to join meetings. We found this not just for conferences, IEPs, and GIEPs, but also committees and parent engagement and evening activities as well. Open houses. We had a lot more attendance to some of those things because people didn't have to worry about finding babysitters. It was much more convenient for them. So I think we want to continue that in the future. It should be something that we look upon as a real positive from this. And I'll just pause and say that many people look at this as such a challenging year and it's a lost year. Certainly challenging, no doubt about that. But I think there's a lot to celebrate and a lot that we can learn from the year and carry forward. So what should we stop doing? Well, in my mind, we should stop thinking like it's 1950. We need to continue to think about how our educational models can continue to grow and evolve. And as Judy was talking about the middle level founders, it led me to think a little bit and reflect. If you take a look at education over the last 100 years or so in the United States, it hasn't changed a whole lot. Probably the most successful reform effort in the American public education system has been middle level education, right? It's stuck. Where a lot of other reform efforts failed, middle level education, the pedagogy around the developmental responsiveness that we need for every child at that age level really stuck. And it's one of the things we should really be very, very proud of. So, I don't honestly know exactly what all is going to come out of what we've learned from the past year and a half. There's great discussions going on among my peers as superintendents, and it's happening in our buildings as well. But I do know that we would be remiss if we didn't think about what were the really, really good things that we had in the past that we want to keep, right? Bringing back the joy into schools, having students come back together and celebrate with one another and their teachers, but also thinking about the things that we can think differently about in the future as well. I think we need to be open to that and think about how school can continue to evolve. And finally, I'll just close with thinking about celebration. We did a lot, as every school did, with professional development, professional learning, as we closed out the spring and headed into preparing for the fall. I'm really, really proud that we were only down for 2 days when the governor closed schools back in March. Within 2 days, we were up and running. We were providing an education for our students, and it evolved. Over time, it got better and better and better because we grew the capacity of our teachers. A lot of that was from organized professional development that we offered in the school district. A great deal, probably equal to that, happened informally between teachers. And I loved hearing the conversations between our educators when they were talking about, I'm struggling with this aspect of online, or how do I make my breakout rooms work for, a specific lab and science class, and people were sharing. And it wasn't just, the veteran teachers that were sharing ideas with our more novice teachers. It was oftentimes the other way around. And I just love to hear that collaboration that we should really, really celebrate. So much to celebrate. Obviously, the resilience of everyone, the resilience of our families and our students, everyone that stepped up, our school counselors, how we kept everyone fed. But I really focus on that shift in instructional practice that's been so significant over the past 12, 13 months. So thank you very much again for inviting me to be part of this program. And, obviously, I want to thank you again for everything you've done to make the last year possible.
Great. Thank you, Tom. Now I'm going to turn it over to Devin Layton from Springton Lake Middle School in the Rose Tree Media School District.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Devin Layton, assistant principal at Springton Lake Middle School. I've been in education for 17 years. Prior to being an assistant principal, which I've been doing for 12, I was a counselor at the middle school and high school level. So that's probably why one of my main things that I would indicate that we would keep is focus on the social emotional aspect of it. I feel like a lot of districts ended up having to kind of reflect on this. I believe in order to educate or inform anyone of anything, you need to make sure that they are socially, more so emotionally okay, right? If you're not in a good space to receive information, I don't know whether or not you're going to really be able to learn. So we talked about students being self-aware. We also talked about coping strategies. So making sure that people are mentally okay, especially with the pandemic. This was a traumatic event or experience for a lot of people, right? People lost people. People were just coping as transitioning back to school. I mean, I don't know, most districts, we still have kids that are fully virtual. So just making sure that emotional piece is centered, I think is essential. Tom already kind of referenced this, modifying the meetings or the look of meetings. We've had a high increase of parents being able to participate in a lot of meetings. And some of our GIEP meetings, if parents come in, they're no longer than 30 minutes. So saving parents time from having to commute to and from the schools for a 30-minute meeting has been beneficial to them, as well as them just managing things at home. I actually asked one of my kids at school, I asked them, I said, guys, what would you like to keep and what would you like to change based off of this? And that's where I got my second part of modify. The kids said they like the computers, but they would like a balance of paper once things transition back to semi-normal, whatever that looks like. So they actually like having paper and they like the interaction on the computer. So stop. What I would love to do, and I don't know, this is just my philosophy on life, is comparing. I think that sometimes we get caught up on comparing, what this district is doing and what another district is doing. Each district has different sets of needs. When I was at another conference virtually, I was speaking to other assistant principals, and they were like, oh, we're in school. Everyone's in school every day, 5 days a week. Well, your school is 200 people. So your setup is totally different where we have 900 people in the building. And so sometimes people would say, well, why did they get to go to school? Or why can they do this? Resources are different. And community expectations are different based off of the need in the community. So I think sometimes we get caught up on comparing ourselves to other people, other situations, and other communities. And we just need to sit back, take a step back, and assess what we have and what resources we can make available to our community. And Tom also said the same thing as far as celebrate. Let's celebrate the resilience of our students and staff. Sometimes people don't know what they can do until they have to deal with it. And I think like Tom said, our veteran and our seasoned teachers collaborated well with our new teachers, and we supported each other. Like we said, okay, you know what? This is how you work out in the breakout room. This is what you need to do if you need to focus on the kids in the classroom. I think the celebration is the collaboration and working together to kind of problem solve. So I'm just proud. And I think, honestly, when we reflect on this in like about 20 or 30 years, we're going to be proud of ourselves of some of the things that we take away from this experience, and that how education is going to look different. And I think it forced us to kind of look outside the box. Some people said, I can't do technology. I can't. Well, this forced you to learn how to do it. So that's my portion that I would like to offer. Thank you for your time.
All right, Devin, thank you so much. From a teacher's perspective, Leyda Owens over there in Northwest Middle School in the Reading School District.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Leyda Owens. I've been as a teacher in the business of education for 25 years, and 17 of those have been with the middle school. I'm going to bring my point. I really love Tom's and Devin's perspective. There's so much that I agree with. So I'm going to bring you my perspective as a teacher from Northwest Middle School, which is in Reading School District, which is the largest urban school district in Berks County. So one thing that definitely in my school, we decided that is something that we really want to keep is the parental communication platforms. Being a middle school, I guess teachers, we all have our own way of communicating with the parents. Every teacher does it differently. And once the pandemic hit, some teachers were using Class Dojo because it was an alternative that had been offered in my school. But most of us teachers didn't buy into it because we thought it was a little bit too elementary. But once the pandemic hit and parents started losing their jobs, we were not able to go back to the buildings. Parents were panicking. Parents were calling the school and nobody was picking up the phone. Then it was immediately an emergency that we needed to keep in communication with the parents. And that's when Class Dojo came into place. And let me tell you, it was a lifesaver, at least the first 3 weeks of school back in March. Parents were able to communicate with us their fears. They were asking us. At the time, we didn't know that this was going to happen. So we just kept reassuring them. Since almost every day we kept getting new information, we were able to keep them informed and they were able to keep us informed. Yes, we had to track down some of the parents because we didn't have their addresses or phone numbers. So we didn't know if their kids were still in the area or not. But again, Class Dojo was a lifesaver. It was actually implemented by the district for teachers K through 8 to be able to communicate with the parents. So that was our main platform, and it was great at the time. Now there are some parents that have 4 or 5 kids in the district. So now almost a year past the year, some of them now they just don't look at Class Dojo anymore like they used to. But I think that definitely it's a platform that should stay, and that I know being an 8th grade teacher, my team, we really like it and we use it and we rely on it a lot. Modify. Well, I don't know other school districts, but my district, we had the virtual setting. So the students will receive 2 classes per day, 2 days a week. So for example, science and math was offered Mondays and Wednesdays. And they had science 2 hours in the morning and math 2 hours in the afternoon. So we were able to create 3 small rotations in which we met individually in breakout rooms with the students. And we were able to explain to them the lesson in a smaller setting. That is something that we really liked it at the middle school level. We normally thought that that's more elementary, but after we tried it, we decided, hey, this is a great idea. But we need some modifications. If we go back again in person in the fall completely, we don't have those 2 hours where we actually can dedicate 30 minutes to the kids. So one of the things that we're thinking would be like, instead of giving the students 30 minutes of instruction, just shorten that to 15 minutes or 10 minutes, and then 15 minutes of small rotations, and then we rotate. which then it brings to the next topic, which is we don't need anymore the Focus Friday, which in my district is a whole day of review. It's on a Friday, and it's pretty much for the students to catch up on any missing assignment or any lesson that they didn't understand, or for enrichment. With the modification of the small groups, we're thinking that what we can do is not doing the small groups every day, just every other day, and then like if on a Monday I have a small group rotation, then on a Tuesday we can review whatever we couldn't cover or whatever the students didn't understand on the Monday. So we don't need a Focus Friday anymore. And definitely, just to close here, celebration. I know I wrote the effort of the students, but honestly, I have to add to it. I think that like just like Tom and Devin said, we need to celebrate the teachers. We need to celebrate us, because like someone like me, who's not good with technology, I had to, in a matter of days, in a matter of hours, many times, learn how I could present using Google Classroom, how I can use the chat all at the same time. And, you know, I survived. I know a lot of us teachers that graduated in the 90s, we survived. So I have to say, not only we should celebrate the students because all of this came out of the blue, but also the teachers, because and the staff. I mean, everybody involved in education, because we learn things that if we had gone back to college to learn how to teach virtually, I think this would be like an entire year, like pretty much like 6 classes. We learned all this by attending workshops. So it was amazing. So from my part, kudos for all of us teachers and educators and principals and vice principals and everybody out there. And that's my take on it. Thank you so much, guys.
Hey, thank you, Leyda. And that is an important point. It really is the entire school community. So when we're celebrating, it's really the effort that every member of that school community, from the custodial staff through transportation, food services, everyone has put in to make this year what it is. So now from Leyda's perspective as a teacher, let's go out to the western part of the state and Alyssa Betz from the Elizabeth Forward Middle School.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Alyssa Betz. I teach 8th grade English at Elizabeth Forward Middle School, and we are an Apple distinguished school. So we have one-to-one iPads. We use a learning management system called Canvas, and it was kind of a smooth transition for us into the digital online learning from being in person whenever the pandemic began. But there was obviously so much to learn and to gain from this. And honestly, I think there are a lot of positives that we're going to be moving forward with in the future. So for keeping things we want to keep, we have 2 types of learning frameworks. We have the asynchronous learning framework and we have synchronous learning. So when we have students in our rooms and we have a 40-minute class period or a 30-minute class period, we're forced into these synchronous learning frameworks where everyone's doing the same thing at the same time. The teachers are moving at the pace that they need to cover the content in that short period. And students don't really have a lot of flexibility to move at their own pace. The one good thing about the digital learning ecosystem that we've created is we have more flexibility to create asynchronous learning opportunities for students. And what that means is we can build out playlists that have all of the information that they need. It's going to have their materials, places for them to ask questions, place for them to collaborate, but it provides them the time that they need personally. So some students that need to refresh the lesson a few times before moving on to an independent practice, they might be able to watch a video a few times and then move to that, after an hour, whereas other students who pick that up really quickly, they can move ahead. One of the really great things about the asynchronous learning model is that students who are ready for a challenge, you can kind of build out these enrichment opportunities. And this has actually given a lot of my students who are at-home learners right now the opportunity to get more content that I could teach in a regular class period. And so I've noticed that a lot of my students that are home learning virtually, they're digging into concepts that are going to prepare them for the high school even better next year. And it's really been a blessing. On the flip side of that, my learners who struggle a little bit and they just need a little bit of extra attention, they're able to slow down. They're able to get on Zoom with me and I can go over the topic again. And we're not forced into this small 30, 40-minute time frame block for learning. So that's something that I definitely want to keep moving forward, is building out playlists that are flexible for students to work at their own pace. And perhaps flipped instruction will help us do that, but we'll definitely be keeping those two frameworks working together in harmony. For modifying, so this year, and I'm just talking personally, some of you may think this is a good idea to use, but I went to my students and I asked them, if you're working on something for me and you're confused about a tech question, or you're confused about a specific grammar piece that maybe we covered a few months ago, what would be the easiest way for you to access that information and refresh your memory on it? Where do you go usually for refreshers or just to learn how to do something? And all of my students said YouTube. We always go to YouTube. Anytime we're trying to learn something new, we jump on YouTube, we watch an instructional video. And so this year I thought, awesome, I'm going to design a YouTube channel and I'm going to just throw a bunch of random instructional videos on there for tech issues and Canvas issues and grammar help and things like that. And it's been amazing. And the thing that I really enjoy seeing is my little updates that say you had 235 views this week. And they're things that you didn't realize that they needed, but once they were there and they knew they could go to that platform and look it up, it was an invaluable resource. So while that is something I want to keep, also talking about things to modify, I wanted to think about how I can involve students in this as well, because I don't want to always have everything be teacher-centered. So then I started thinking, well, what if I featured a different student in different videos with things that they're an expert on, giving them a chance to kind of shine and teach other students about things that they're knowledgeable about. So I did start doing that, where now I have student featured videos. For example, if a student is really good at screencasting videos and then editing them for projects, then he could make a video on that and I could post it on my channel, and then he could teach other students. So that's something that I've started dabbling in within the past couple of weeks. It's been going really well. So I'm going to continue on that path and work towards modifying that as an instructional support for students. Things that I want to stop moving forward: remote only learning without a Zoom requirement. One of the most upsetting things to me this year is that I have students who I've never seen their face. And there's nothing I can do to force them to join a Zoom, short of me driving to these students' homes, knocking on the door and showing them how to log on. It's kind of up to them as being their responsibility to do it. So right now in my district, we don't have a Zoom requirement. So these students are kind of floating out there watching my videos. Some of them aren't, I don't know. There's no way for me really to tell. They're doing assignments and they're trying to follow the models. And then whenever you ask them to Zoom to go over a couple key pieces to revise, you don't get an answer. So I think there needs to be some element of accountability on the students' part with joining the Zooms, just so that we can have a touch base and I can actually see their face. You can learn so much about students' understanding just by seeing their facial expressions. And that's something that we've lost this year, even in person with the masks. It's hard for me to look around when I'm teaching grammar and I can only see their eyes and I'm trying to judge, is this good? Are you understanding this? Are you learning it? So I think that that's something that we need to modify and or stop. And then celebrate is the same as everyone else so far: flexibility and perseverance of students and educators. We've all been sharing hats, passing the hats around. Some days teachers are working as counselors, some days teachers are working as tech support, vice versa. Some days you have counselors that are doing administrative work, and everybody's just passing around, you know, the hat, and we're working to support each other. And it's just been really something to celebrate that we've been doing such a good job coming together to help students learn in this crazy environment. So,
Terrific.
thanks for your
Thank you,
time.
Alyssa. Nicely done. We're going to come back over to the eastern side of the state, and John Ross from Lionville Middle School, principal of Lionville in the Downingtown School District. John?
Thanks, Gail. Good evening, everybody. Thanks so much for having me. I'm happy to be here representing both the middle level and the eastern side of the state and the PA Principals Association. Quick shout out. We were talking earlier about some of the giants of the middle school movement. I've spent 29 years exclusively in middle level. I was trained, cut my teeth, you would say, in Drexel Middle School in the Upper Darby School District, where my principal was Joe Galley, who was kind of a descendant of some of the people you saw on that slide earlier. So I've kind of learned from those who learned the best. And I think you're going to see that reflected in some of the things I have to say here, because I've been all about the middle level my entire 29 years. And that's why it's so important that we kind of get together and have these conversations, because no one gets us. No one understands middle school people at all, except other middle school people. So for my things to keep, this was alluded to earlier, using Zoom, using the technology, but I'll add a little bit of a wrinkle to it. Something that we discovered is how great it is at reaching kids. A lot of our teams have been doing team activities at night, trivia night, categories night, all sorts of different games. And it's been a great turnout. Kids don't go to dances anymore. I'm not sure how many of you have noticed that, but dances aren't really that big of a deal to our kids like they were maybe when I got into this a long time ago. But our kids absolutely love the Zoom meetings with their team teachers, where they ran all kinds of games and activities. So we definitely want to keep doing that and build upon that, and try to get them to come in person too when we go back, but we're going to keep doing those things. Mental health outreach was one of my next ones, one of the things to modify a little bit. We were keenly aware of the mental health crisis that was facing our country prior to COVID. And so we had started to adapt to that. And this added a whole nother wrinkle to it. The number of kids, it's been alluded to, the number of kids that were just completely tuned out of school this year, due in large part to their mental health, to being secluded, to being shut out from everyone. So we gathered up kids that were kind of fitting into that category according to their teachers, and we spearheaded an effort to address those kids. The teachers did an outreach to them over Zoom and over email and over our Schoology, our learning management system, trying to reach them. And then we narrowed it down to a few more kids. And when we got down to the ones that we just couldn't reach, I went to their house. And I went door to door, showing up in the middle of the school day when they were supposed to be on Zoom, when they were supposed to be engaged. Their parents knew I was coming, but the kids didn't always know I was coming. And I tell you, that was huge, because it actually not only got kids to get their cameras on, but I actually got a couple of kids to come back in person as a result of that, when they saw, that we really cared and we wanted to be there to help them. So we want to continue to do those sorts of outreaches, if that's a word. We want to do that sort of outreach to our families in the future. And we're also working in conjunction with an organization in our community called A Path to Hope. There's a great nonprofit that's run actually by one of our former parents. It's a nonprofit charity. I'm actually on the board of directors for it. So I'm putting a plug in for it, because it's just a tremendous work with connecting families to mental health resources. And we all know how short that list is right now of available mental health resources. So it's a great organization that we're going to only grow our partnership with in connecting our families with them. The thing to get rid of, contact tracing, just takes up so much time. We brought kids back and allowed them to sit a little bit closer. And now when one tests positive, just the amount of time we have to spend tracing. And then you get into, on the bus ride, was assigned seating followed, and the amount of time reviewing video and having to check and make sure how long they were around. It's just so much. It's just such like a management thing. And I'm not big on management stuff. I'd rather be doing leadership stuff. So hopefully we don't have to do that anymore. And then the thing to celebrate, we've spent a lot of time at the middle level, right? I mean, we talked about the leaders of the middle level movement focusing on relationships. We've gotten a bad rap at the middle level for years and years about being warm and fuzzy and, going soft on kids and focusing on relationships. And to me, this year is the year we shine at the middle level, because we know what it's all about. We know how important it is. We've been doing the work and learning how to connect with our kids for so long that all we had to do was figure out how to do it virtually in some cases, right? So because we had that focus before as middle level educators, I think we deserve a lot of credit for a lot of the great stuff that happened this year at the middle level in particular, because our teachers, our educators, who are all middle level mindset people, they get it. And they've been putting relationships first and getting to know students first. So when we started this year and everybody was scrambling, how are we going to learn to get to know kids? How are we going to build this? So important. Everybody's talking about SEL and all. We've been doing it at the middle level. So I think that's something to celebrate for all of us, and something that we'll continue to, boast about and put our chests out about a little bit, because I think we deserve the right to do that. So that's it for me. Thanks everybody for being here. Thanks for this opportunity.
Hey, thank you, John. As you've heard throughout those first 5 presentations, things like SEL, the mental health issues, and relationships have really been a central theme. And who better to tie all those up but our final panelist, Kori Barley-Stoudemire, who is a counselor from Kennett Middle School. Kori, all yours.
Good evening, everyone, and thank you to PAMLE for this opportunity to share this evening. I am Kori Studemeyer, and this is my 20th year as a school counselor at Kennett Middle School. And I get to be the last panelist, and everyone has already said exactly what I wanted to say. I'm not sure if you saw me nodding and agreeing as we went along and making notes and trying not to repeat what was already said. But I noted in particular to school counselors, one of my co-panelists mentioned, I think it was Leyda, that, technology wasn't necessarily her strong suit. And so she got thrown into it with the pandemic. And I will admit that as a school counselor, we weren't always up on the latest technology, but the pandemic forced us to meet the demands of our and the needs of our students and figure out how to use technology. And we have been able to provide a lot of additional supports to our students, such as virtual calming spaces and virtual opportunities to connect with counselors that I would absolutely like to continue or see continued across the state and across the country, especially because during and not that we want to be available on weekends and summers, but through our virtual platform, we have resources that are vetted by our school counselors that students and families can access. So I absolutely would like to continue that. And of course, the commitment to social and emotional learning, which I would say initially was left under the umbrella of school counselors, but now to see that all educators have embraced the importance of social and emotional learning and are incorporating elements into their practices. Let's keep it going. In terms of modify, I would say how students are graded and what is acceptable engagement. And I point that out because with this pandemic, especially in the community where I work, I did have some students that had to step up and assist their families in unique ways as parents. Some families were not able to remain home, so parents had to leave to work. So some of our middle school students had to take care of younger siblings and things of that nature, and they weren't necessarily able to complete assignments or engage in Zoom classes the way that some of their peers were. So I would like to just see us be willing to meet students or continue to be willing to meet students where they are and take into account some of the other needs in their world. And then with regard to STOP, I would say tasking counselors with some of the administrative and clerical tasks that limit our ability to equitably provide academic, personal, social, and career guidance to all of our students, especially during a pandemic. And again, we are team players all day, every day, but our kids needed us in very unique ways during this pandemic. And sometimes clerical tasks took us away from being available to students, and knowing that there were limits on the mental health resources available in the community, it required us to step up in a mighty way. And then finally, in terms of celebrating, I would say the resiliency of our children and the families, and the opportunity for children to learn some life skills that we don't necessarily teach in school. I will tell you that personally, I have a middle school age child who learned how to wash clothes for himself, which may sound insignificant, but it's a skill that hopefully as he leaves high school that he will know how to do, because I will not be interested in washing those clothes anymore. And he also learned how to make eggs. So some of those life skills, some of those simple things that kids need beyond just the academic rigor, I think they had an opportunity to indulge in because we had the time. And then the last thing that I would like to say is in terms of keep and modify, I would say keep smiling and being patient with yourself and with our students. And, you know, I think middle school educators, and I see one of my colleagues has joined us this evening, we are hard on ourselves. We have high expectations for ourselves. And sometimes we need to just breathe and remember that, you know, it's not all about the grades, and we have to put relationship before rigor, because when students know that we care, which John pointed out that that's what middle level educators do well, they will show up and show out for us. So again, thank you for joining us this evening and allowing me the opportunity to be a part of this panel.
Hey, thanks, Kori. And I know earlier you had a graphic that you originally had on your slide, talked a little bit about the oxygen mask theory. Could you share that with folks? Because I think that's a key point.
I spent a lot of time during the pandemic and even now reminding not only teachers, but also parents that when we get on an airplane, again, we care about the kids, we care about our children, our students. But if you are on an airplane, they always instruct you to put your own oxygen mask on first and then to assist your children. And I think that it's important because sometimes we are so quick to pour into our kids that we forget to take care of ourselves. And if we're not at our best, we are not able to give our children the best. So take care of yourself.
Thank you. That's a key point for everybody to keep in mind, that self-care is really critical. So we do have some opportunities for some questions and comments. If folks have a question, you want to drop it in the chat, or if you would like to unmute yourself and ask that question. I'm going to throw a few questions out and ask any of the panelists who would like to respond to that. The first question that I have for you is, what did you learn about connectivity issues with your students, and how did you address any inequities if you came across those in your district? So how did you deal with the connectivity issues for all your kids?
Yeah, Gail, I can tackle that question. That was something that we had concerns about very early on. When we were capable, we were a one-to-one district prior to the pandemic. And so we felt from that standpoint, we were pretty prepared. The change we had to make was with issuing our devices for our students in K-2, they didn't go home with them typically. We would just keep them at school. They were iPads, and 4 through 12, we use Chromebooks. So we had to issue all those devices to get them home and onboard our parents and our students with being able to access things from home. But one of the first things we did was start to consider the students who might have connection issues from home. And so we ended up purchasing hotspots, looked for internet discounts when we could. Avonworth is a fairly wealthy district, so we didn't have a tremendous amount of those issues, but there still are inequities, right? And we still had to seek those out and find out. I think one of the best hires we made in the past year was the hire of a school social worker. And we did that prior to the pandemic. And thank goodness we did, because she was just indispensable with connecting with parents to make sure they had the resources that they needed to keep their students engaged. And as all of the panelists and everyone online knows right now, we certainly, because of equity issues, but also social, emotional, mental health issues, we had some issues with students who were disengaged. And so it led to some challenges from that standpoint as well, not just the technology challenges, but the challenges with mental health and keeping our students engaged as well. So, I'd love to say we were 100% successful, especially with the mental health issues, where we weren't. And I'm not sure anybody was out there, but I know our professionals worked their hardest, and we'll be continuing to work hard as we. I think we've been talking a lot in our district about transitioning our model from a reactive to a proactive when it comes to social emotional learning and mental health supports for our students. So where I felt like our social worker and our school counselors were reacting in many issues because of the circumstances, not to any fault of their own, but they were at the mercy of the circumstances. We really want to take some time now as the school year ends, as we prepare for next school year, to get a lot more proactive things in place in terms of our program itself to support all the students and not just react when we know there's problems.
Great, thank you. This question is probably specifically directed towards the teachers. Could you give us some ideas as to how your assessment of student learning changed with remote instruction? Any insights that you could offer for that?
I can speak to that. I've moved a lot to diagnostic testing. So with the diagnostic testing, you're not actually giving a grade whenever you're doing that. It's more of data for the teacher to understand where your students are. So that happens with pre-tests and post-tests. Whenever I'm doing a post-test with something, usually it is multiple choice. I'm getting the data I need, and then I'll design some type of project where they're applying the knowledge, and then that's the thing where they're grading. So with the multiple choice test, it's just a diagnostic. I'm seeing where are those skill gaps, where do I need to fill in, which particular students aren't where they need to be. I can pull them aside, do small group instruction, design something enriching for the students who are ready to go. And again, not actually putting that diagnostic assessment into the grade book. And that takes a lot of stress off of the students too, because they know that, they can try their best. And if they fail, it's not a judgment of them. It's a judgment of what do I need to do to fill in the holes there. So that's been a lot of new testing with us, is just focusing on the diagnostic to see where everyone is.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Gail, in my situation, I used a lot of alternative assessment. Like I used projects. I teach science, 8th grade science. So we did a lot of lab activities, and I counted that instead. It was very difficult for me to rely on a test because many times I didn't know if the kid was the one doing the test or if it was somebody else.
Right.
So I did a lot of alternative assessment, projects and labs.
Oh, and I heard somebody describe this last week as you're assessing the information and dividing things into two categories. There's the stuff that kids can Google so that anybody can go find that, but you're assessing the stuff that kids can't Google. So doing things like that lab experiment and having them write, a critical response to something, those pieces that really elicit more of their understanding and what they know, as opposed to the stuff they can Google or that mom and dad can help them with. How about a question just in general, and any of you that in the course of this run into instances where you had students engaging in online bullying or harassing other students? And if so, how did you address those concerns?
Well, that would be me.
Okay, you.
So again, being able to utilize online platforms to access students and to allow them to, anonymously share information. We do continue to use Safe to Say and things of that nature. And so our school counselors and our principals and social workers just worked very closely together. And I'll be very honest, we did some of the same things that Jonathan did, where we took our show on the road. So even amidst the pandemic, we had to do some home visits, in our protective gear, and we were able to access some of the, like Valley Creek, for an example, will come out to perform certain assessments. So we were able to do that when students were, at risk of harm to self with regard to, bullying and things like that. I also continue with conflict resolution, and bringing students together. So we just continued to do whatever we needed to do. We stayed in constant communication with parents, and, parents, which is something I thought was novel, is that sometimes the parents would speak to one another and, commit to addressing, their students, and we were able to facilitate that.
Okay, great. Thank you, Kori. Appreciate that.
I have a question. Could I ask a question?
Yeah, certainly.
With teaming is one of the really strong components of middle level, and I know John addressed that, and I think Tom Ralston talked a little bit about that as well, where we have veteran teachers that really didn't want to get involved with technology or really didn't understand it as much as the younger teachers. How has the pandemic sort of affected the collaboration of teaming, where teachers are able to communicate with one another, share ideas, share best practices? How has that either strengthened or not strengthened the teaming process?
I take that one. This was a forced change. No one had the option of saying, I'm not going to do Zoom. That wasn't an option. You had to do Zoom. And then because they had to do it and because they had to engage with the students, it forced them to ask questions. It forced them to say, you know what, I don't understand this. And more importantly, I think as humans, we know especially as a team, you're kind of like a family. You have your 4 core subjects. So we kind of understand some of the areas of growth. Like you live in a house with somebody. Okay, I know you really don't understand how to do this. So I'll step up and show you. And even I'll model it for you just to kind of help alleviate you having to ask me. Or I'll come over and say, oh, this is a new tool that we found out. And then our district was great about having like tech sessions where we had a tech person assigned to our building, and they would just do small PDs throughout the course of the week. And people could just jump in and ask for help. And then kind of like Alyssa said earlier, they would do like tutorial videos so that people could reference those as well. So I feel like there was no room or no opportunity to have an excuse because there were too many resources out there. Like we had Nearpod. And again, our tech person was amazing with the tutorials. And we already kind of had Schoology in the one-to-one, but as far as people being comfortable, they just supported each other.
Terrific. Thank you, Devin.
Bruce, can I just answer that real quick? I just want to put a mention about, teaming and talking about strengthening teaming. I'm not sure it entirely answers your question, but we've had teams, quote unquote, at our school for a long time, but the last couple of years, we've really put an emphasis on creating an identity of our teams. And one of the things that we found this year, we did a survey of our students, like a Google Form survey, where we kind of asked them for reflection and input as to how they felt this year and how they felt in the connection with their teachers. And the chart for the team teachers was like through the roof positive. The kids, saying things like, I'll never forget them. They are the reason I got through this pandemic, making comments like that. I showed our staff and I was like, see, I know what I'm talking about. Because I've been trying to push teaming, real true teaming, not just in a name. We're not just a middle school because it says it on the sign out front. We're a middle school because we honor the integrity of teaming and that it comes first. And so I feel like one of the positive things that came out of all this is I was able to say, I told you so to people because I've been preaching about how important teaming is, and the results of the student survey just totally drove that point home.
That's great. Thank you.
Perfect.
Bruce, do you mind if I add one little thing to that as well too? So, since my time as middle school principal to now as superintendent, our enrollment has grown. And so when I started, our enrollment was around 100, which was a really nice size for an interdisciplinary team at a grade level. And now we're sitting at 150, 160. And we've been kind of limping along, still maintaining our interdisciplinary teams, still maintaining our team planning period, our daily team planning period and the protocols that we have in place for that. But this year really accentuated, I think, the need for us to think differently about teaming. And Mike Hall and I have been working on some reconfigurations of what our teams may look like in the future, and breaking into a two-team model, breaking that 160, 150 down into 75, 80 member teams, which I think will really help. So, I echo what John said. I think the team was essential to keeping they were the glue that really held everything together. But we realized that 150, 160 is a lot to expect a team to be able to service. And so I really like the model that we've developed moving forward. I think it's going to be real positive for us.
Great, Tom. Thanks for that endorsement of teaming. Before I turn it back over to Bruce to wrap things up, I just want to share a little piece with you that was written by Donna Ashworth from something called History Will Remember. And think about this in terms of your kids. She says, in 20 years' time, people will not ask the children of 2020 if they caught up with their studies. They will not ask them what grades they made despite the year off school. They will ask them with wonder, what was it like? They will ask them, how did you cope? How did you feel? What do you remember of those days? They will listen in awe to tales of clapping on the doorsteps for medical workers. They will sit open-mouthed to hear of daily walks being the only life we saw and how much we missed human contact and gatherings. They'll be amazed to know about empty supermarkets, online concerts, birthdays spent on a screen, and a life lived inside. They will listen and then sit back in an amazement and say, wow, you went through so much. So think about what you would like your children to take away from this whole year. Tell them they are not behind. Tell them they are not missing out. Tell them they are extremely special indeed, and they will forever be made stronger by this unique time. Tell them catching up is not even a thing because they have grown so much in so many other ways. Remind them too of the fun stuff, the family jigsaws, the window rainbows, the Zoom bingo, the feeling of safety and togetherness amidst the chaos. Let them take that thought with them through life. Change that narrative now, and it will travel far. Tell the children they are not behind. They are special. And hopefully that's a message that you heard come through from all of our presenters this evening. So with that, let me toss it over to Bruce, and he's going to wrap up tonight's program.
I'll just wrap this up. First of all, I want to thank the 6 panelists. Thank you for spending time to sit here and talk and share ideas, especially in the evening. I know it's been a long day for many of you, so thank you also for that. And I want to thank everyone that attended today. We've done webinars now since, I think it was July. We've done them every month. And this being our last one of this season, we will continue this again in the fall, in the late summer. Again, it will be the second Wednesday of each month, and we'll be looking at topics in order to do that. And if you have ideas for topics, make sure you email us, go to the PAMLE website and just send an email of any particular topics that you might be interested in. This webinar has been recorded, so it'll be on the PAMLE website. So everyone will have access to that. And it will also be, to get the Act 48, and the evaluations will be emailed to you. So you should be getting an email. And even if you're not requesting Act 48, complete the evaluation. It's always important for us to see that. Another thing is we're going to be doing a workshop. Gail is going to be running this with Linda Hopping, a workshop on the successful middle school, this we believe, and how to utilize that within your schools. And it's going to be 4 days or not full days. I think a couple hours at night. I'm not sure how we're going to work this out, but the details will be on our website probably within the next week or so, with the exact dates that we're going to be doing this. And the registration will also be live on our website for that as well. But it's a great book. If you haven't read the new edition of This We Believe, I encourage you to do that. But I think it's really important. But again, I want to thank you all. Thank the panelists again for being part of this opportunity to share your ideas. So that's all that I have. Thanks. Anyone else? Paul, you want to add anything or?
I want to thank everyone who attended this evening. and any of our webinars throughout the season. We really appreciate your participation. PAMLE and Eastern University have partnered on these webinars, and we want to thank Eastern University for their support and for their technology and the work of their graduate assistants as well. So if you have no other questions, we will end for this evening, but if you have any questions, we'll stick around for a couple more minutes and welcome those questions. You can certainly unmute yourself and just ask the questions right to the panelists. Thank you.
I'll ask just a quick question, in the sense of, do you find teachers, when Alyssa, when you were talking about your videos and creating your videos and doing all of these things, do you find teachers working together? Like you'll do one video and then another teacher will do another video, you put them together so all kids will have access to that? Do you find teachers working together in that sense and sort of share responsibilities so you can get twice the work done?
Yes, so my cohort, she teaches 8th grade language arts on the other team. We'll sometimes collaborate. We have videos where we are in there together and we're teaching together, and we'll post those. The other thing that we do too with the teaming and cross teaming is we do a newsletter every month. And in the newsletter, we'll feature different lessons that we did or different technology that we used that was really successful. And then we send it out across the middle school. So that's another thing too, where it kind of helps vertical alignment, where I can see, oh, 7th grade in English just did this. It worked out really well. How can we build on that in 8th grade? So there's some familiarity in the background with it. So not only are we working with our cohorts, but we're also reaching out to the other grades as well in the middle school. And so that's something new, is the newsletter. We've really been enjoying that.
Good.
Well, I'd like to say that I was really impressed by all of your presentations. I'm pretty sure that all of our founders are smiling right now, because what you've all described is exactly what they had in mind. The attention to relationships, school as family, paying attention to social, emotional, psychological needs of kids, and the whole idea of grading. Conrad Teffer used to talk about a culture of assessment, where the kids should look forward to the assessment so that they see where they need to put their efforts, that it shouldn't be an aha, I got you culture of assessment. It should be this is giving us feedback so we know where to go. So all of those pieces, I think, fell in, and it was interesting too, hearing so many of the projects that you're putting into your programs in schools that sound exactly like their idea of advisory sessions, their advisory groups. And advisory got a bad rap at the beginning of middle school movement, because people said that some people said, oh geez, I sound like Trump. Some people said that advisory was trying to take away the authority of the parents, which of course it isn't. It's, you see a different side of the kids. And they wanted to make sure, all of them, that that the kids felt comfortable reacting to their teachers and getting along with them well. I have to tell you just a real quick story. I was doing some work in Australia, and I was working in a school where there was the Maori were the biggest population of the school. And there's a lot of bullying and a lot of racism that goes along with that. And I was in a school classroom. Mrs. Smythe was the teacher, and I asked her to leave because I said, I'd really like to talk to some of you, talk to your kids. And so she did. And I said to the kids, this is really interesting. I said, you seem to really like school. And I said, but if you don't understand something, or if you're having, somebody's bullying you, if you're having a difficult time, to whom would you go? Who would you reach out to? Some of the kids said my mother, but most of the kids said no one or a friend, and not one single person mentioned a teacher. And so I said to the kids, well, now Mrs. Smythe is your teacher. You seemed to really get along with her. Wouldn't you confide in Mrs. Smythe and try to get help from her? And the kids said to me, we love Mrs. Smythe, but she is so busy that we don't think that we can bother her with our problems. And so we don't. And when I told Mrs. Smythe that afterwards, she came back into the kids and she said, you know, you can ask me anything. I won't always know the answer. I can't promise you that it'll be confidential. I might have to bring in other people to help you, but please don't think I'm so busy that you don't matter, because you do. So there was a perfect example of a teacher who meant well, but didn't communicate directly to the kids that I am there for you. Her action showed it, but a lot of the kids are in the concrete level of operations, and they don't always understand the actions transferring into that kind of relationship. So I just want to thank all of you, because I was very impressed, and I know they would have been too.